Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sanay Naik, and on behalf of Greenway Appliances, I welcome you all today to our first ever webinar, Linking Forests and Kitchens, Sustainable Energy and Climate Change. This theme is at the core of what we do here at Greenway. On this occasion of World Environment Day, it is my pleasure to introduce our guests for this discussion. Ms. Gina Chiwela is the Executive Director of People's Action Forum in Zambia. PAF is an NGO working in non-formal education and the empowerment of rural communities in Zambia. Mr. Jack Kalipenta is the community specialist at the Zambian Governance Foundation. He is an educationist and also a member of the N2B network in Zambia. We also have Mr. Ankit Mathur, the co-founder and chief technical officer at Greenway. He is a mechanical engineer by training and is a graduate of IIM Ahmedabad. Our moderator this evening is Mr. Achal Mehra, CEO at Greenway. He is also the founder of Bodhivan Resorts and co-founder at Yoga House, Mumbai. He is an electrical engineer by training and he's also a graduate of IIM Ahmedabad. So with a warm welcome to all the guests and everyone joining us right now, let's get right to it. Achal, go.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending upon which time zone people are in. Before joining this sector, I was also not aware of the magnitude of this problem that we are going to discuss today. Almost 3 billion people globally and 700 million in India rely on traditional cooking methods. I was not really aware of. I thought everybody was using LPG or some other method of cooking, but really this problem is large. 3 billion people globally, 700 million in India are relying on traditional cook stoves, what we call chulas here. Inefficient burning of biomass from these traditional cook stoves actually emits greenhouse gases, and that at an aggregated level contributes almost 2.3% to global emissions. And these emissions have a very negative impact on climate, what we are going to discuss today. And some studies even show that our South Asian monsoon gets impacted because of it. 60% of farmers rely on rains in India, and that getting impacted by carbon emissions actually impacts their livelihoods as well. WHO also estimates that roughly 5% of the global disease burden is attributable to household air pollution, mainly coming from these traditional cook stoves. And then there are various studies which are also showing that degradations of forests are related to fuel wood extraction. Almost 50% of wood extraction actually goes towards traditional cook stoves, cooking through them. So this brings us to the theme of our webinar today, Linking Forests and Kitchens, Sustainable Energy and Climate Change. Today we are going to discuss the problem and its magnitude, experiences and views of our expert panelists, and if there is a solutions landscape, what are the solutions possible? So let me start with Ankit Mathur, who has been a pioneer in this industry. Ankit, is it relevant to link rural kitchens with climate change? Why? And give us an overview of the problem in India.
Hello, everyone. I'm really thankful to Sanay, Achal, and rest of the Greenway team, Chitra, etc., who organized this. And I'm, again, really thankful to all of you who are attending, especially our partners all the way from Zambia and our partners across India. I think for me to sort of comment on whether it's correct or not to link kitchens and forests would be rather selfish, given that we've been in the business of making, efficient cook stoves for a while. But that aside, the fact remains that that collection of firewood from forests, from urban forests, at time this leading to deforestation is a real problem. It's not something which happens just in the fringes in really remote areas. In most of the developing world, it is something that that most households have to do. I mean, women have to continuously hustle for collecting fuel wood, and also making sure that that they're used in whatever systems they have at present. And then these systems, 3-stone fires or mud cook stoves, are not the most efficient ones. So yes, there is a link. There's definitely a link between some amount of deforestation and stress on the forest resources, as well as unavailability of clean cooking or improved cooking methods. However, I think a large part of deforestation as it is may not be attributable to just cooking. A large part of it happens on account of land use change, people clearing forests for farming, for collecting timber, for furniture, etc., etc. But yes, I mean, in terms of the burden to households, in terms of the time that they take to collect firewood, in terms of the effort that is there to chop the firewood in the right sizes and then use it in a fairly polluting method, it is quite an inconvenience, and that is something that we continuously strive to address.
Yeah, so Ankit, can you give us a little bit about the landscape in India in terms of, how many households are actually using traditional cook stoves, and what are the trends that you have observed in the past?
Yeah, sure. I think I can. I mean, when we started Greenway, that was closer to 2011. A few years into starting the enterprise up, we had the 2011 census that came about. At that time, around 2012-13, when the 2011 census numbers came in, LPG coverage in India, liquefied petroleum gas, the bottled cylinders that we have, that was less than 30% of entire households across India. Mm-hmm. And in rural areas particularly, it was only 12%. So just doing a quick number there, back then, close to 600 million households were still not using any clean method of cooking. And even with a lot of effort of the current government in terms of distributing free connections, in terms of making people aware about the advantages of LPG, the challenge is that a lot of rural and semi-urban households do not have the resources to continuously keep buying LPG bottles. They are also not in areas where they have piped gas connections. So I would say that at Greenway we are trying to provide with an intermediate alternative, which is the best available technology to wean people away from the really traditional polluting methods of cooking.
Okay, so now let me flip this question to another continent. Gina, welcome to the webinar. Can you also give us a little bit about, what's the landscape of traditional cook stoves in Zambia, and what are the changes that you have observed there?
Hello, Achal. Nice to meet you all. Mm-hmm. Well, Zambia is really one of the countries that has a really high rate of deforestation. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are other reasons why, the farming, etc., and industry, but the traditional cook stoves have been one of the main reasons why there is such a high rate of deforestation, because you can imagine out of Zambia's over 15 million people, the majority of these are in the rural areas, and the rural areas are largely not electrified. So they are totally dependent on the use of the traditional cook stoves, using firewood, fuel wood, if you like, or wood that has been turned into charcoal. So that is really the only methodology that they would have to do their heating and cooking in the most remote areas.
And and what's the what is the does it lead to kind of gender inequality as well, in the sense that there is time poverty, there is, energy poverty for the women. So do you think it leads to gender inequality as well in, rural households?
Well, most definitely, Achal. I should say that the burden of collecting wood, making sure there's a meal, whether it be once, twice, or 3 times a day, make sure that this is happening. Women and girls are the ones that have to collect the wood. And this means that they are, the ones that are least losing out time, because they have to be, out to collect the wood. For girls, when they should be in school, they may be asked to have to collect wood. And I've seen oftentimes girls coming from school and they're carrying wood back home on their way from school. And these are long distances they're having to walk. And of course, when it comes to choosing between whether the children should go to school, especially the girl, or they need to help out with collecting wood, they will more often look at what is closer to survival, and that is make sure that we've got the wood collected. And I would say it does really lead to a gender imbalance or inequality, in the sense that the girls, as I've mentioned, their priority is to help in the kitchen, help at home. So they're losing time, may go to school, or they have to be up really early if they want to get to school. They're getting back home, having collected wood and all that. You may find that they're really tired, and they've had to go into the forest to collect this, and it puts them at at that disadvantage. They can't attend to their schoolwork as easily as the boys can. And another aspect I would point out is the fact that this makes the women vulnerable, especially the girls.
Mm-hmm.
They are having to go out into the forest. They can be attacked at any point, and this has happened. And so you'll find, like, for the girls, this may now mean an early pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy, and the girl loses, her opportunity to go to school. So I would say this is really an issue also about gender inequality, yes.
Okay. As an extension to this question, I'll go to Jack, who's also one of the panelists. Jack, welcome to the panel. Can you tell us about what are the options for clean energy now in Zambia? You have been working with rural communities. So what are the options and what are the best practices people are now moving towards?
Jack, could you please unmute?
Jack, you are muted. In the meantime, if I think Jack is having some technical problems. So Gina, can you ask this question?
I've managed to unmute.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have very limited alternatives at the moment in the country, in Zambia. Fortunately, of course, previously there were some which were very commercial and which were very unaffordable to people. And fortunately, of late, we have had the cleaner alternative through Greenway, not because we are on the panel with you, but that has really made a great difference in the community where we've been working. Because we haven't had any serious alternatives.
Okay.
So
I've heard that people use charcoal cook stoves in Africa, and sub-Saharan Africa, and Zambia as well. So what is the environmental impact of it, and why is it not considered an improved cook stove?
The challenge we have about the issue of charcoal is that mostly there's so much high demand of charcoal in the urban areas, the people in the rural areas don't use much of the charcoal.
Okay.
They use mostly dead wood, and of course, where they are very squeezed in terms of population, that's why really they cut fresh trees. But mostly it has been like charcoal being burnt in the rural areas and transported into the urban areas. Now, again, in terms of policy, of course, what has been happening is that charcoal has been discouraged for a long time, but then nothing concrete, no research has been undertaken to come up with alternative cookstoves that may use charcoal.
Okay.
Sure.
So Ankit, with your engineering background, would you consider charcoal an inferior, in terms of gas emission to fuel to, the fuel wood?
So actually, charcoal is a processed fuel. There's no doubt about that. And in theory, it could burn cleaner than wood if the combustion is controlled. Okay. It could also be produced in a sustainable manner. The challenge is that a lot of these technologies come at a certain cost, and traditionally people have been making charcoal at a fairly low cost. And in the same way, there are stoves and braziers that burn charcoal, which are really cheap. So getting people to move to using the same charcoal onto a new product would be prohibitively expensive. There will have to be some sort of a large-scale dissemination, which comes with some subsidy, or there would have to be a policy change that makes it easier to have technologies that make charcoal a lot cleanly. I mean, both Gina and Jack would know the amount of pollution that charcoal manufacturing causes, right? I mean, when I was visiting, I saw acres of land cleared and heaps of wood just being charcoalized, and that was extremely polluting. But having said that, in theory, all of this could be achieved, but it comes at a cost. Yeah.
Right. So going back to Jack, I think, how do you think traditional cook stoves have impacted the biodiversity and forests in Zambia? Jack, you are muted again.
Right. Quite a lot. In the sense that when people get wood, I mean, the forest has got a lot of other microorganisms, that really get affected by when people are cutting down trees. So in that case, it disturbs the other organisms that are found in the forest. But now, just a little bit away from fuel, you see, there is also a tendency, like the kitchen. When talking about the kitchen, let's go beyond just the fuel. For example, the dishes that are prepared. You may find that, like Southern Africa, people have a delicacy which we get, which is called mostly mopani worms, and these ifinkuvala and so on. These are the larvae of the emperor moth, and when people go to collect these foodstuffs, I mean, look, they're supposed to grow into becoming butterflies or moths, but then by bringing them into the kitchen, by cutting down trees in order to collect these foodstuffs, that really affects the biodiversity.
Okay.
Yes.
So going back to Ankit, what are the environmental costs of not paying attention to rural kitchens? I mean, how do you foresee that in India specifically? And what could be the reasons for adoption of new technologies?
Okay, Achal, I'll try to break your question down.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's address the second part of your question, which is about what could be the costs of not adopting clean technologies, right?
Right.
Yeah. So as you had pointed out earlier, I mean, there is definitely a disproportionate burden of diseases when you use wood or charcoal as a fuel, and you have a lot of COPD burden, the pulmonary diseases, and that is definitely pretty high when you don't have cleaner methods of cooking. It also applies to not having clean electricity access or limited electricity access. When you do not have electricity access, you use charcoal for lighting, and that also causes a lot of emissions, right? So one of the things that the UN did was classifying access to clean energy as one of the sustainable development goals. And within that SDG 7, both energy access, electricity access, as well as cooking energy access was tried to be incorporated, right? Now the thing is that electricity access is improving across the world at a faster pace than clean cooking access. And so there's a lot of research being done right now across the world as to what the public health impact of less access to clean energy leads to, right? Now, while answering your second question, I've forgotten the first question actually.
No, the second question was, what are the reasons for resistance to adoption of new technologies? I mean, there are like traditional technologies or traditional cook stoves, but then there are technologies like improved cook stoves or clean cook stoves like LPG or electricity, as you mentioned. Right. What are the and from an Indian context, what are the challenges or what are the reasons for this resistance of adoption?
Okay, so I think some of the technologies that are present in India are fairly mature. LPG is an extremely mature technology. It's been around for 35, 40 years now. I mean, the primary reason for lack of adoption now, after a big push towards distribution, is economic in nature. I mean, people just do not have the disposable income to invest in clean methods of cooking. The same has been probably better addressed for electricity, because a lot of devices now have become a lot more efficient. So the generation has increased, the access to electricity has increased, but in terms of clean cooking energy access, I think the reason is economic. Of course, in some cases, you still have logistics related challenges in terms of getting the cylinders to really far-flung areas and not having stocking points or distribution points which are close to where people live. So I think these two are pretty much the main reasons.
Okay, Gina, the same question to you. I mean, in Zambia, what do you see as reasons for not being able to adopt new technologies? And what are the the new technologies that are available there? For example, LPG or other electric devices. What do you think are the reasons for not the low penetration of these new technologies?
Well, I would say firstly, I would agree that the main reason would be economic. Okay. Because even when options are given, there is usually a cost to it. And we are already talking about communities that are living in poverty. And so their closest and cheapest option is the local, forest. So if you bring in an option which really it seems to be a luxury to them, it's not going to increase uptake at all. And secondly, I see that one of the reasons is also just the fact that people do not have information. right? The need for change is not a discussion in the public arena. It's not something that is being brought down to the community level, in terms of let's find alternatives. And going further into that, people may not even understand why you're looking for alternatives if they don't understand what the issue is in the first place. It's just a question of whether I can afford it, or I don't mind using wood. And if they don't know anything about the fact that this is affecting their health, this is having new technologies would free their time more for them to do other things, example, for children to go to school, or for the women to spend more time in their gardening, etc. You will not have the kind of uptake that is really needed. So I think one of the main reasons is a lack of information and a lack of understanding. And thirdly, it needs to have a real, focused effort to bring this information to the local communities, so that they know that when I'm making this change, it's affecting my life. It's not just a question of somebody selling some technology to me.
So I'll extend this question to Jack now. Jack, you have been working with communities who are adopting some of these new technologies, like for example the improved cook stoves. If you have spoken to some of those households which have made this transition, could you share some of those experiences? How do they feel about it? Whether they really see any perceptible benefit coming out of this transition?
Sure, thanks a lot. Yes, they have seen the benefits. One, some women could comment that, look, our pots now are cleaner than using the wood. That's one thing. And one reason, the other reason is that they use less wood. When they are using, they use the little sticks or the cobs and so on, instead of them really going like going into the forest to look for firewood. So those are some of the benefits that are seeing to it. Although some would still say, look, they're taking longer than the wood itself when we are using the firewood. These seem to be slower, but really they are seeing a lot of benefits in the sense that there's less smoke. There's time for them to do other things, because instead of them just every time working with the wood. Yeah. So, but then at some point, some resistance to these technologies coming because some of the cultural elements, for example, like for the cleaner technology like biogas,
right?
Yeah, biogas, which is not promoted a lot, but in some circles, when we try to discuss with the people, they say, look, the stuff being used for the biogas cannot really use that to use for our cooking. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Understood. Yeah. In India, it's the other way around. I think people really worship the cows, and then they anything coming out of it is perceived differently. So I guess maybe not so much resistance toward it.
Yeah.
But yes, I guess I take your point. So yeah, remaining on the technologies, Ankit, the LPG is always considered as a clean technology, but I see there may be a lot of unclean elements to it, from manufacturing to installing it, and of course it's a fossil fuel, whereas fuel wood is still renewable. So why do you think there is this perception, and is this perception real? Or how do you perceive it?
Okay, so there are two elements to it. One is that when the point of use emissions, as far as the point of use emissions are concerned, LPG is very clean. You just have carbon dioxide and water vapor. But if you talk about the life cycle emissions of getting an LPG bottle into your house, one would have to do a bit of analysis to understand what exactly is the overall emissions that go into that, right? That's one. I mean, because the point of use emissions are low, and the health impact is definitely positive compared to using an unprocessed fuel like wood. One would tend to consider LPG as a cleaner fuel. There's absolutely no doubt about the fact that it's a fossil fuel, and that more work will have to be done to get to a completely renewable cooking paradigm. Also, because a lot of foods that we cook in India as well as in Zambia don't lend themselves to being cooked on electric heaters very well. So the point that Jack was making in terms of the culture, and Gina was making in terms of the resistance to new technologies, that's real. So it would be difficult to replace a fire for cooking, right? So unless we figure out a way of having clean hydrogen or something for cooking, I don't know how we can replace LPG with a cleaner fuel at this point.
Okay. Going back to Gina. Gina, what is the regulatory framework for adoption of new technologies and mitigation of climate issues in Zambia? I mean, is the government really now helpful? Is it cognizant of the fact that it's a real issue which will impact us eventually, and it's already started impacting us? So is the government taking a proactive role in mitigating some of these problems, and may also in creating awareness about these technologies to be adopted?
Well, I would say that at that level, there is pronouncement and support talking about climate change issues, and meetings, conferences, and trying to bring that information to people. But I would say that the ground for it is open for the changes that that can be made. But I would say so far a lot of the change is really waiting for it to go beyond the talking, beyond the workshops, beyond the meetings, and projects, so to speak, because we do have people doing projects around climate change issues. But I think that the D-link is between where it's being discussed and where the change really should be happening, and at the community level. And a lot, again, I would like to emphasize the fact that this burden of the fuel and bringing it in and dealing with this is largely on the women, but the women are often not in these conversations. And really, our understanding of it is that working with cleaner energies and is something that has to have a woman on board, because the women are the caretakers of nature, from the natural role of providing food, nurturing plants in the home environment, etc. So the state of the soil, the water source, and the weather patterns are all therefore of primary concern to her. So I would think that as a whole, you need to get rural communities, and then specifically more the women, to be part of the conversation, because once they understand why there is this concern and how it affects them, at the household level, then I believe that we would be able to get, a measurable change in the, climate issues, deforestation, etc.
Right. So I think, what you're suggesting, that, inclusion of women in regulatory bodies, in, top positions in NGOs, that's an important, driver of change in the real sense. So I'll go to now Jack. Jack, in terms of the adoption of, for example, improved cook stoves in the communities that you work with, do you see any gender differences? I mean, if you introduce this technology to a man, or if you introduce this technology to a woman, do you see any differences in terms of perception of this new technology?
There isn't much difference. I've got one example. One community, some young men came to get the stoves. And it took time that one of them was not using that stove. So Sanai tried to query, because there was something like to monitor it. So I went to this community, I saw this young man, I said, hey, why aren't you using this stove? He says, look, I'm keeping it because I'm about to get married.
Okay.
So that when my wife comes, I'll have a stove to use. So I can see that kind of a thing. So in terms of accepting the new technology, like the stove that we're trying to use, there's no gender disparity about it. They're all embraced it.
Okay.
Sure.
Ankit, same question about India then. Do you think, because, a lot of cook stoves go to these rural communities, and women and men, usually men are decision makers in rural households in India. So in terms of adoption of a new technology to be introduced there, do you see any gender bias in terms of adoption?
Yeah, Achal, I would say that, our experience at Greenway is quite different from what Jack just described.
Right.
We continuously struggle to, get women to purchase the product. We continuously struggle to get men to appreciate the need for the product in their houses. I really wish that we were able to get to younger men and who were progressive enough to buy the product for their prospective wives. I mean, that is something that we must, change about our messaging and communication. That's definitely a silver lining. But on a serious note, I think that India is one of the countries that has a significant gender disparity. The women in the households and communities have a seriously curtailed decision-making power. They have very few assets in their names. They have almost no money that belongs to them. It belongs to the household, right. and they're seen as the custodians, but they're not seen as the primary spenders. I mean, it's a little strange. It would be interesting to now that the discussion is on that topic. It would be interesting for us to understand it better. But having said that, I would think that if men were cooking in India, we would be selling a lot more stoves, something like 5 to 10 times of what we sell. I see Harish on the on this call. Harish is from EnviroFit, and I'm sure he would also appreciate this sentiment, wholeheartedly. We can probably have a conversation with him afterwards on this.
Right. Ankit, what about the again, climate change has become a big topic globally. People are, talking about it all the time, the governments and, this Paris Climate Agreement, etc. So how is Indian government, there are certain commitments India has towards it. Is clean cooking also a part of that commitment in India? And if so, is the Indian government taking any proactive steps to promote clean cooking in India?
I think at a central government level, the whole Ujjwala scheme has been pushed quite hard. I think that they claim that they have 80 million new connections,
right?
And I think at some level there's a clear intent to definitely have a deeper impact or deeper access to cleaner cooking. The challenge is, again, addressing repeat usage. The challenge is getting households to buy clean technologies over and over again.
Okay. And in terms of any new regulations that are coming in terms of, it is still, the cook stoves are still taxed heavily in India. Is there any, do you see any changes in the policies or any favorable climate to climate change actually?
Achal, I think it's to a large extent it is the responsibility of individual players, both companies as well as individuals, to choose. In terms of taxes, yes, we are taxed. I mean, we do pay a lot of tax, but I think there's a limited impact that policy change could have without having a clear buy-in from prospective customers.
Yeah. Right. So, so going back to Gina now, in terms of the foreseeable future, what do you think are the solutions to to this problem, and what are the new technologies that are being adopted now, and you think are the best suited for the Zambian market?
Well, I think we need to take things on 2 feet, if you like. One is to start with the fact that people need to appreciate why there's a need to change how we are dealing with this issue, and the fact that it does affect each one of us, affects our earth, affects at us at household level. Right. So we need to bring the conversation to every level that is engaged in this process, including the community level, simplifying the issue, simplifying the questions, simplifying the solutions. And when I say simplifying solutions, also not bringing the solutions per se, but realizing that if people understand what it is we are talking about and why, they themselves will and can have solutions. How, if we are talking about, well, let's not cut down all the trees, let's not clear all the land, but this is where people are doing their farming, then what would be the solution? And we go through those processes, together, and people can own that process, and even lead it. And then on the other hand, also promoting, like these cook stoves that are energy efficient, and working through any concerns that arise. And I think consistent discussion. For example, Jack spoke about how some people felt that it cooks much more slowly than the firewood they're used to. How can we find a solution to that? What can we do in order to deal with that? So I think besides participation in discussions, we must build the capacity also with the relevant information, understanding the whole climate change discussion, skills for nature preservation, conservation, and not just with the adults, but also in the schools. And I know that is one thing that is happening in many of our schools, I believe, where there's that discussion around climate change, planting trees. Why are we planting trees? And children learning from an early age why we need to make this difference.
Right. Thank you. Jack, you work with these rural communities, and there are these two impacts on, every household. One is an impact on a woman's health who's cooking, and then there is another impact on the environment because, the forests are being cut and, and the pollution. So do you think they understand these, environment? I think health related issues, they understand very quickly, but whether, these forests are their real assets, whether they should preserve them, and whether, an improved cook stove actually leads to less wood being used and thus preserving forests. Do they understand it well?
Well, in the first place, let's get it from one perspective. I think earlier on I mentioned that most of the forests are being cut for charcoal.
Okay.
And that charcoal is used mostly in the urban areas, and peri-urban areas, where there's a lot of energy deficit in terms of electricity and hydro and things like that. And so, for our project, you know, although initially I know, let me just bring a cat out of the basket. Initially, I know that we're supposed to give, to distribute the stoves so much, mostly in the rural areas, rural communities. But then we saw at some point that the rural communities that we're working with got saturated, and so then the demand shifted to the peri-urban,
Okay.
who use mostly charcoal.
Okay.
Now, this maybe way forward, what you can look at is that, are we able to get some technology that the poor in the peri-urban areas can adopt?
Okay.
Because the demand, all the trees that are being cut in the rural areas for is to ferry charcoal. They are poor in the rural areas.
Okay.
They need money. They appreciate their forests very well, and they get dead wood, and only sometimes that they could get some of the live trees.
Okay.
So maybe our discussion should go around also on how are we able to get some technology that would help curb the transporting of charcoal from the rural area to the urban areas, because it's the urban where the demand is. So the supply is in the rural areas.
Okay. Okay.
Sure.
So that's also one of the reasons for deforestation.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I would like to thank the panel for this enlightening discussion on this climate change and the clean cooking methods that are being used and how they contribute to an adverse the clean cooking methods actually improve the climate. And I think it being one of the hotly discussed and debated topics, I think it is our individual capacity, we should continue to promote clean cooking in some way. I would like to hand it over back to Sanai now, because if there are any questions from the panel, we would like the panelists to answer those questions. Sanai?
Hi. So everyone who's here today can ask us some questions in the chat. We have about 10 to 15 minutes to address the questions. The panel will be here to answer any of the questions. So please go ahead and ask your questions in the chat.
I think there was an early question from Shiv Shankar Das that asked if charcoal.
It was about the efficiency of charcoal. So I think Ankit, you answered it, but if you could just rehash your point.
Yeah, I mean, short answer, charcoal is not a clean fuel. Yeah, but yeah, we can have a longer discussion on that later. Okay.
Thank you, Ankit ji. Thank you very much.
I think Franco has wanted to say something. And then
Mr. Franco, you can please go ahead if you would like.
Good afternoon. It's good afternoon our time.
Yeah, Franco, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Just presentation before the UF and many of the international organizations and local organizations on the decade of the UN launching ecosystem restoration. And I've just come to terms with the fact that the UN and the global community has shifted and given priority to ecosystem protection. And that for me then asks and begs the question that, are we having a real conversation? Because when we talk about alternative energies, renewable energies, we talk about stoves and engage in those conversations. I think those are very important, but I think we are missing the link in having a real conversation. Why do I say that? There's recognition that most of the ecosystems have been almost annihilated, if I was to give a terrible indictment, all right? and most of the ecosystems are almost extinct. And so it just goes beyond talking protection and talking about remedial measures. Where is the opportunity? And that's the conversation, and I think that we should be having. And even when we talk about capacity building, if we are talking capacity building without having the real conversations, then we have missed the point. Because I gave an illustration in the presentation, that a stick illustration, and a stick illustration is where you're trying to balance your pen and mimicking a branch of a tree, and then you're saying that you cut one end of the tree, it will not balance. And that's what we have done to our ecosystems. And then we need to find that equilibrium. We need to find that balancing point again, because even if we find a balance on that illustration, we will not get back the ecosystems to their original form. And those are what we are calling successive ecosystems. Now, what is the opportunity to finding that balance? And that's the conversation that we need to be having. What are the new technologies? What are the relevant technologies? And that restoring of ecosystems is going to be hugely expensive. Now, if that then happens, and that's the conversation, that restoring the ecosystems is a new dynamic and a new narrative, a new conversation, who do we make priority in terms of the people that will lead the conversation? The environmentalists, the eco-scientists, and the indigenous knowledge torch bearers, and then engaging communities and NGOs to refocus their finances and their models, knowing for real that the ecosystems are not in their state and they will not come back to that platform. So that's the missing conversation that we are having, because if we keep talking renewable energies and stuff, we're stroking the surface without really dealing with the problem as it is. So that was what I was trying to say, that restricting this kind of conversation that is so serious and pertinent to a narrowed conversation misses the opportunity. If we were engaging the people that I've seen on this platform and bringing in their experiences and sharing in their new trends and new sciences on how we should now restore our ecosystems before we can now talk to people about cutting trees and renewable energies and stuff. There's a deep conversation that we need to have. Those ecosystems that have been destroyed, what technologies, what opportunities do we engage to restore them, so that then the conversation then must mean, okay, so we can go to the communities and say, now cutting trees doesn't make sense. Renewable energy is the way to go, but let's deal with the foundational issues that are a crisis. That is a missing link, and then we need to bring it up from the bottom up and then make it the conversation that leads on the surface. That was my contribution.
Thank you so much, Franco. I think we definitely should have that conversation. I must admit that we do not have time or honestly the expertise to have that conversation at this point in time. But I think we will definitely keep in touch and try to have a more fruitful and a deeper discussion on the issues that you've raised. Thank you.
If I may, Ankit?
Yes, please.
Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Franco, that there is a much deeper conversation that needs to be had, that is really critical. Talking kitchens is one element of it, and you know what the backstory is to what's happening in the kitchen. And I agree, because I did mention a little earlier that there is, you know, the issue of looking at what is happening within the ecosystem and why is this conversation even happening, because everything is changing, but we need to understand why, and everybody at their own level needs to I'll give an example of the work that we've been doing with WWF in improving the health of the Kaffir River Basin, which is essentially the conversation, on the ecosystems and how, rather than we've had the conversation at that level, how do we now, get the community to engage in that and be part of the healing process or change process, as Franco mentioned, the getting the communities, indigenous communities, they do have solutions, as I mentioned earlier. They do know there was a way that they were preserving, the life around them and keeping the system and being part of that ecosystem. So yes, it really is a much deeper conversation, and that we would need to have, even to get a higher uptake of the, the cleaner energy options that we have.
Thanks, Gina, and thank you, Ankit, for addressing those comments. We have another question from Dwayne Kalovaki. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. What specific taxes are levied on the cook stoves in your respective countries? And is it levied on the manufacturer or the consumer?
Okay, I'll try to give that a shot. Actually, when it comes to taxes on goods and services, these are indirect taxes. So in a way, they are levied on the manufacturer or the distributor, but eventually the customer ends up paying for it, and that's why they're indirect in a way. So the good news is that in Zambia, these taxes are nil. There is no VAT on the cook stove in Zambia. But in India, we have a goods and services tax in which we pay 12% of the invoice value as taxes directly. I hope that answers the question. And in terms of other taxes, there could be import duties if you import the product. So in Zambia, again, there is no import duty. There's only some clearance charges that one has to pay. But in India, the basic customs duty, I think, is 20% on imported stoves.
I think there is some contribution from Shiv Shankar to everyone that, that there are the bottlenecks for diffusion of clean energy products in rural India. One is that the availability of R&D center is a challenge, or there are few. Awareness and training centers are lacking. Then technology and information exchange is not happening, networking at multi-level monitoring mechanisms, certification and quality control, promotional agencies, and after sales. So thank you, Shiv Shankar, for your contribution.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think that brings us to the end of today's discussion. Thank you everyone for this very insightful discussion. We are really glad that Gina and Jack were able to join us today despite the time zone differences. Thank you so much for making the time. Thank you also to Ankit and Achal for being here today. Last but not the least, thank you to Chitra Lakhera, a Research and Communication Associate, for conceptualizing and organizing this webinar. Please use the link in the chat to leave us your feedback regarding the session. We will be back with a similar discussion soon enough, hopefully. Until then, you will be able to see a recording of this session on our YouTube channel. Please follow us on social media for updates about our work. Thank you once again and for joining us, and wish you all a very happy World Environment.